So tonight we have Annelise Francey, who was a student of mine, a student of Jason's at IC, an emerging media major with minors, I believe, in animation and computer science. Is that correct? Cool. And Annelise is a great student. Didn't CG independent study with me. That was a good time too. And tonight she'll be talking about kind of her journey from college into fabrication, and then as she's kind of pivoted to grad school at Rochester Institute of Technology. So I'll go ahead and cede the floor to Annelise.
Great, awesome. Can you just remind me how long I have?
You have like I'd say like 30-40 minutes, and then questions will probably be good.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if I'll be that long, but we'll see. All right. Share. All right. Are we seeing a slideshow that's currently playing?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. I guess just a little bit about me, kind of like what Brad said. I was an emerging media major, and I minored in animation and computer science. When I initially went into Ithaca College, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no career goals. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. And that kind of played a part in me picking emerging media because it was like an open-ended kind of major. You could kind of do anything you wanted with it. So for our capstones, we could really do anything as long as it was tied into technology somehow. So while I was in emerging media, I kind of focused on, well, at first I focused more on the computer science stuff. I really thought I was going to go into the tech industry. So I was focusing on like user interface or user experience design, going into website making, app design, stuff like that. But then as I got further along in my time at IC, I ended up really enjoying my time as an animation minor. And I knew I kind of wanted to do something that involved more of the artistic side of things rather than the tech side of things. So let's see. All right, is this showing? It's probably not showing. Let me actually share my entire window.
Yeah, it's always a conundrum. Right. It's like application. Then I have to jump.
Yeah. Here we go. All right, are we seeing a Behance profile now?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So while I was at IC, I made 2 capstone projects for emerging media. I made one that I'll get into a little bit later for my junior project. It was more tech-based. And then for my senior capstone, I ended up doing a lot on stop-motion animation. So I really had an interest in that specific type of like art form. I really liked animation and I really liked physical art. So one of the things that I wanted to try to do was see if I could marry technology and this form of animation. So in the industry itself, there's already a pretty big emphasis on technology. A lot of common, a lot of the bigger studios actually use 3D printing to make a lot of the face plates that the little animated characters have. So this is called replacement animation. Every time a character makes a new expression, they're changing their entire face. Sometimes it could be like the section of their face, like around the eyes and the mouth. They can combine the eyes and the mouth differently to make different expressions, or sometimes in certain films, they just reprint the entire face. So I wanted to try to do this, but on a smaller budget. I wanted to see if this could be done with like a 3D printer that you could get at home, or a 3D printer you could order online that like the average person would have access to, rather than like a multi-million bajillion dollar company and they're like super amazing 3D printers that can like print paint on top of them and everything. So my capstone was really just focused on the fabrication of it, because that's kind of where I ended up leading towards the end of my time at Ithaca. I realized that as much as I like tech and as much as I like 2D animation, I really like building stuff. And this was kind of like accumulation of that. So I started by just designing the characters. And then I got into the hard part where I was designing a 3D model of my character's face. So as Brad mentioned, I took a little bit of a like little side project study with him uh, for 3D animation, and I actually learned quite a bit about modeling in 3D as well. So I used the program Maya to make a simple faceplate, kind of like if you can see up here, starting with an eyeball and some rings, and then really working out from sketches until I had this basic face. And then from there, I could animate the face and do a bunch of different expressions to try and get based on what I wanted to do in my story. So I, printed off, well, not all of them. There was some trouble with the printer that I was using, so I printed part of the faces that I wanted. I made individual pieces. I knit tiny sweaters. I was able to use funding from emerging media to get like a professional armature. And I used one of the stop motion studio labs. I was able to rent that out for like basically the entire semester or the entire later half of the semester to use just for my animation project. So I was making tiny details, stuff that I want to say on scale, like that flute right there is probably like maybe 2 inches long. um, and this was just like knickknacks that I either had around house, like this was an old Christmas ornament, or this was stuff that I like handmade, like the cat scratcher was made out of, I believe, hemp string and like a tiny pen spring that I found. Same with like these lights. These were just lights that I got like Joann's, rest in peace, that were just like the little copper wire ones you can hang up in like a locker, battery operated. But then I used tissue paper to fold origami lanterns and put around there. So that project was mostly focused on just handcrafting the puppet, the sets, and then 3D printing all of the faceplates and integrating that and showing that like you could do that on a smaller scale at home. So that was my senior capstone. And soon after I graduated in 2023, when I graduated, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I actually took a bit of a hiatus. It took me a couple of months to like get back into the groove of things and start applying for jobs. And I'm sure, as some of you might know, applying for very niche job markets like this can be kind of hard. I got a lot of rejections. I got a lot of, oh, we actually, you're qualified. We think you would work for this position, but we aren't hiring right now. Or we're looking for someone with more experience and not someone who just jumped out of college. A lot of stuff like that. The other issue was that this very specific type of job that I wanted, this fabrication job, it's very hard to find people hiring for that specific job. So I was looking all over the internet. I was looking for stop motion. I was looking for theater. So like if any backgrounds or props, scenic design, I was looking into that. I was looking into, trying to think, I had it written down somewhere, but I was kind of looking into like anything that had to do with building so I could kind of build up my portfolio. So one of the things that I actually did after I graduated is I contacted local theaters and asked if they had any like areas that they needed help with in terms of like scenic design. One of the theaters that got back to me was the CNY Playhouse. They were doing, I think, The Fiddler on the Roof in 2023. And the director emailed me back and was like, hey, we really need a scenic artist. Do you think you could like design some of the scenes and, do some of the background painting? And I was like, yeah, totally, build up my resume. So I did this. It wasn't free. I think I maybe made a little bit of money, but it wasn't a lot. It was mostly volunteer work. But that was something I could put on my resume, which kind of led me to my next position. So another thing that I was doing on top of looking for like local jobs, I was also just looking kind of anywhere in the country. I was open to moving if I needed to. And the way that I was finding these really specific companies was I was just looking on Instagram. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, I guess, LinkedIn, any type of social media network. I was searching for specific companies that kind of fit the vibe that I wanted. So the awesome thing was I would find like companies that were like making puppets or making stop motion stuff. I would follow them, and then Instagram's, algorithm would realize, oh, you're into this, let's give you some more. So I was finding a bunch of companies that I didn't even know existed, that are relatively small, that I could apply to. Now, most of them weren't hiring at the time. The thing is that, like I said, the job I was looking for was super niche. So it's very rare to come across, oh, this exact specific job is hiring right now. So I was really doing my part to reach out to them. And this did lead to a lot of rejection, but eventually I actually got somewhere with this, um, which I'll be talking about in a second. Um, so I was basically searching for jobs for a couple of months. I'd pick up jobs kind of like this at the CNY Playhouse. Anything that could build my portfolio. I was making sure to work on personal projects that I could add to my website, stuff like that. Eventually, I had to have some form of income. So I was working at like Target for a while. And, while I was doing that, I was still building my website. And eventually I was on Instagram and I was scrolling and I happened to see that one of the companies that I followed was searching for new hires. And they had posted a skill survey on like Google Forms and anyone was open to fill it out. So I said, what the heck? After work, I filled it out and I thought nothing would come of it. And a couple days later, they actually emailed me and said, hey, we saw your skill survey. You have a pretty decent range of the skills that we're looking for. Would you be open to a Zoom interview? So, of course, I was like, heck yeah, like this was my dream company. I think they were one of the first companies I actually followed on Instagram, like one of the first people that like, this was before I was even searching for jobs in that specific realm. They were just people that I thought was pretty cool and ended up just following them for fun. So this wasn't even like one of the companies I had searched out and found. They had kind of found me. But so I did a quick Zoom interview with them. It was very like lax. It was just the two heads of the company and I want to say one of the head hard goods fabricators. I can get into a little bit what that means. He was like the tech guy who would build like animatronics and robots. Um, just a few of like the very core members of the team. And they kind of asked me what I was good at, what, they walked through the survey and they would ask, okay, you said on this that you rated yourself a 6 out of 10. Can you elaborate on that? And they would just walk through that. Now, before I went into that interview, I actually did a little bit of research, which, you should do anytime you go into an interview. So I had been looking way further into their company than I already had done. I wasn't just going based off of their Instagram. I was going on their website. I was looking into everything that they made. And I actually found out that the two co-owners of the company actually were Ithaca College alumni. And this was kind of like my in. I was able to sprinkle that in during that little like pre-interview and be like, hey, yeah, I went to Ithaca College. I just graduated. That's pretty cool, right? Fellow bomber. I wasn't like that, but you know what I mean. And that kind of got me an in. They were kind of like, oh, she went to Ithaca. Like that's, maybe she doesn't have the exact skills or maybe she's not experienced enough, but, maybe going to the same school that we went to kind of tells us a bit about her or enough to at least trust her a little bit to hire her on for a future project.
Hey, Annelise.
So that's pretty much. Oh, yep.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make sure that you're not advancing your slides and we're not seeing it because your camera like is no longer feeding. So I just want to make sure that you weren't like advancing slides and we're not seeing it.
Oh, I should still be on the CNY Playhouse.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Yeah, sure thing. um, yeah. So, sorry. The they had told me after that interview that like, they currently weren't hiring, but they were looking to hire for future projects. And I basically took that as a big fat like, we don't like you. You're gone. I was like, okay, try it at least. But then a couple weeks later, they actually reached out to me and told me they had a project for me. So this company was Monkey Boys Productions. They are a super awesome company that make a lot of puppets and props for TV and theater. So quickly, to kind of give you like a vibe of what they do. One of their major clients is actually Saturday Night Live. They make pretty much all the puppets you see on SNL every Saturday night. I wasn't part of that team, but they had a team of people who, during the time that SNL was actually running, like during the time their season was premiering, they would have people that would like stay overnight, pull all-nighters, and create all the props that SNL would commission them for. Because SNL writers would like write something and be like, okay, by the end of this week, we need a person in a giant Fiji water bottle costume, and they'd be like, okay, sure, and they would get that done in less than a week. And I got to see a lot of cool stuff that they were doing with that. They did a lot of commercial work. They have some of their own little shows that they helped produce. On Broadway, they did, if I can find it, where are you? There you go. Little Shop of Horrors, or off Broadway, sorry. They made a giant puppet of Audrey 2.0 for that. They made a puppet for, I want to say, Into the Woods at some point. They've worked for Jimmy Fallon. They do a lot of work for John Oliver. Most recently, that I know of at least, they made the giant bird puppet when the Bird of the Century was announced. I don't know if anyone's seen that episode, but it's a giant Puteki Teki, and they made this huge, enormous puppet, and they sent people over to the studio where John Oliver was shooting, and they would be puppeting it while he was giving his like monologue or whatever. So I didn't work on any project quite that like famous, I want to say, but it was still pretty cool, the one that I got to work on. So when they're hiring new people, they like to hire them for like shorter projects, ones that maybe aren't as important, just to kind of get a vibe of how they work with the company, how they mesh with the work environment, and if they're like a good, trustworthy employee. So the project that I ended up working on was actually for NASA. So I always joke with like my friends, like it wasn't the computer science minor that got me into NASA, it was the animation minor, the one that had me making puppets and stuff. I was able to show them some of my work on my website, and mainly some of the stuff that I did for emerging media, mostly my final capstone, and then a couple of stuff I made on my own time while I was working at like Target or doing some of the stuff for the scenic design for CNY Playhouse. And that's really what got me in there. So this project was for the Kennedy Space Center down in Florida. They have a puppet show for the Peanuts. And they had originally consulted a team in Canada to make these puppets for them. And everything was going smoothly until like a year later when they started to fall apart. So they went to Monkey Boys and they're like, hey, can you like fix these, make these easier to control? We have a lot of people who are complaining about like the mechanics inside of them. They're kind of hard to control. We can't really move the mouths that well. They're really heavy. We have to do these like half-hour shows every hour on the hour, and we're lugging around these like 30-pound puppets. Is there a way you can make these a little more like ergonomic for our puppeteers? So my job was to kind of recreate every helmet in foam, using either foam patterns that we made ourselves, of like spheres that we made on Adobe Illustrator, printed to size, and then cut out in foam and formed into a puppet using barge cement glue. Let's see. We had to cover those in certain types of fabric just to kind of ease out some of the bumps. You can see the ridges on the top left corner. So we used some fleece to kind of fix that up. And then we had to use the original spandex that was used on the puppets before, that we had gotten in, the old puppets that they didn't really want anymore. You had to recycle the fabric used for that so they would look exactly the same. So this stitching and this like bright orange spandex is from the original puppet that we had to put on the inside of the helmet. The top right up there, you can kind of see, well, this is Snoopy. It's an awkward photo of Snoopy. You can't really see a lot of his face, but that is Snoopy. And that was kind of my job the entire time, is really just redesigning these helmets. We had other people who were in charge of like the inner mechanics of making the mouths move a little bit better, redesigning some of the like the gears and the 3D printed parts on the inside. I was a soft goods fabricator, so that meant I mostly dealt with foam and fabric. But then other positions at the company, like hard goods, those were the people who did the mechanics and all of the metalworking. There's another position at that job also that I was interested in. I didn't have enough experience with it, but they were asking me about it because they are actively, I don't know now, but they were actively hiring for it. is the 3D design. They're actually doing a lot more with 3D printing and 3D design right now. They're taking models at like miniature scale and printing them out so that they can make full-on foam models by making patterns based off of the tiny miniatures. And then there's also like individual pieces for each puppet, like individual gears or like little like components like eyelids, hard pieces of plastic that they need that they actually model on 3D software and then print out. I believe they have a resin printer, filament printer, and then when I got there, they recently got a, forget exactly what type of printer it is called. It had a bunch of like plastic dust basically, and it would use lasers to form the dust together. So it didn't need any like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's like a sintering printer. Like they do that with metal too, metal dust, and they'll like fuse it like that. That's cool. Very cool.
Yeah, it was really they invited like the entire like if we had 2 floors of people working there and they would invite the entire company basically down there like check out this cool new printer we got. Here's a demo on how to use it, although half of you are never going to need to see this thing in your life. You know, they were really like into the latest tech and they would kind of share that with the rest of the company. And then I just shared like the bottom like 2 right photos. That first one was just my desk. I got my own little desk. I got a name card. Everyone got their own little lamp and cutting board, stuff like that. It was really relaxed there. They had 2 dogs walking around in the company at all times that were owned by some of the, not the owners, but some of the like core members of the team. And they had members of the team who had been there just because they were like friends of the owners and they also went to Ithaca College. Someone I sat across from, I believe, like 40 years ago, he went to Park. I think he actually stayed. We were talking. He was in Landon dormitory. I was joking about how that was my first dorm, and he was like, "I stayed in there like 40 or 50 years ago." Like, you know, just kind of connecting about that type of stuff. And then across from him was another student who was actually from my same class of 2023. But they were from Dillingham. They were a costume design major. So they kind of pulled people from all over Ithaca College and then all over the state. There was a couple of people working in Binghamton, a couple of people who were in New York City. The company itself was based in Pennsylvania, but a lot of the people who worked there were actually from New York and kind of had connections to the company either through Ithaca or I guess the puppeting community in general. That's a whole nother topic that we don't need to get into. That's a very niche community of people who all work on puppets. They all either worked for Jim Henson at some point or knew someone who worked for Jim Henson. It's very it was a lot to take in when I got there. I had people who were like, "Oh yeah, I worked on this show that you used to grow up on," or "Oh, I worked at SNL and I met X and X celebrity." It was like whatever, like people who were like very nonchalant about like their inner connections to Hollywood just because they puppet. It's a very like close knit community of people who are really into like the Muppets, basically, that I got to kind of peek into.
Annelise,
So I
can I ask
worked.
a question? Really quick before you move on from this section, I was just wondering, you mentioned that these were cut out from basically like flattened projections in Illustrator. Was there like
Mhm.
a person specifically responsible for that, or were you responsible for that, or like, yeah, how did that work?
Oh, yeah. So, uh, that was kind of left up to the individual fabricators.
Oh,
So they
cool.
had like a kind of like computer section off to the side, and I think they were kind of testing me and the other new hire to kind of see what we could do because they kind of just were like, "Yeah, go at it. See how you make a, I'm sure you know how to use Illustrator. Go for it." So I kind of had to like wing it.
Mm.
I honestly didn't have too much experience with Illustrator specifically, but since I had learned a lot of other Adobe products, I was able to kind of piece it together. Um, it's kind of like a trial by fire situation. But yeah, it was they really looked for people who had like a very wide range of skill sets. So they wanted someone who could go on Illustrator, make a pattern, translate that pattern to foam, cut it out specifically in a certain way, glue it together so that it makes a 3D shape, sand it, use heavy machinery to make sure it's like perfectly sanded, like a belt sander. And then sewing expertise going in with the felt and then the spandex and using a lot of hand sewing techniques. While I did do some machine sewing, that bottom center picture you can kind of see, a lot of it was mostly hand sewing. That was like a very big part of the interview process that they asked about, was whether or not I could hand sew and if I knew different stitches. Because
Cool.
they're making 3D objects, they're mostly working with stuff that you can't fit under a sewing machine. So that was like a big part of it.
I'm sure you got
Um,
a lot of practice in, right?
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I definitely learned a lot. Like very like last minute YouTube video tutorials on how to do like a baseball stitch or kind of figuring stuff out as I went. Of course, there were people there who I were totally open to helping me with stuff, and I did definitely ask for help. Um, but there was also times where I was kind of like, oh, I kind of, I want to prove myself. I want to show that I definitely know all the stuff that I totally said I knew on my resume. And like, you know, not that I lied, but I definitely did like embellish a little bit about like, oh, I know hand sewing. They didn't ask specifically how much about hand sewing they knew. Like, I don't know every aspect of it. I just know enough to get me by in this scenario. So there were like little pieces that like, I kind of wanted them to think I knew. So I totally like Googled it while I was working there and it ended up working out. It's not something I would recommend. But for like smaller tasks, like learning a specific stitch or like something super inconsistent or sorry, not inconsistent, inconsequential, that's totally fine. It wasn't like I was Googling like how to use a sewing machine or something that's like super basic that you need to know to work there. It was more like side stuff. Um, yeah, sorry, that was a little tangent. But so I did that for 2 months, and then I thought I was done working there. I took another month off. I was looking for more jobs, and then they ended up hiring me back. So I guess I did a good enough job the first time that they wanted me back for a second job. So the second project, once they kind of got to know me and got to know what type of worker I was, they hired me onto a larger job. This project I can't really talk about. I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with that. Super protective of the IP, like the company that owns what we were working on. Like they're very well known in the industry for sending any lawyers after anyone for the smallest infringement. So I can't really talk about it, but I do have a picture of like some of the foam work that I was doing. They don't look like it, but these actually turn into arms eventually. These pieces would wrap around and be glued a certain way to make forearms. So it was very like conceptual, like going from like this really weird flat object to making huge 3D objects that looked nothing like the original concept. Yeah, so I really enjoyed my time at Monkey Boys. I would actually love to work there again. But the thing about it was that it was all contract based. And I learned quickly on during my time there that I did not enjoy constantly looking for a job. Some people are like really awesome at that. They're really good at keeping their portfolio updated, having a website that's constantly churning out updates, keeping on top of that, and staying on top of the industry, searching for current companies and putting in resumes constantly. That wasn't just something I was really great at. I've never really been good at marketing myself. I'm not super great at like uh, interviews or like public speak. It was just something where I was like very nervous about doing all the time. And thinking ahead to the future, it was like, if I have to market myself every couple of months just to get another job, to keep working for a couple of months, it wasn't something I was willing to do. Um, Now, if you're like super passionate about this industry and you're willing to do that, I would totally recommend it because it's definitely worth it. Like my time at Monkey Boys was probably my favorite job, like in my entire life, and probably will be. But I really needed that stability, which is kind of how I went into going towards education. I had a lot of experience volunteering at my dad's school. My dad, in that picture on the left there, he, ever since I was like a baby, he taught at Morgan Road Elementary. And I would come into school with him all the time. I would work with him to grade papers, set up classrooms, do bulletin boards, all that stuff. And the more I thought about how I wanted a stable job, the more I thought about how, well, my dad has a job that he seems to like. And I've always enjoyed working at his school for free, so why not get paid for it? It also kind of brought me back to, if you remember, I mentioned the my junior project for emerging media. I had made a educational homepage, like a landing page for students to use uh, back when it was like my first time using Adobe XD or Figma or any of those like app design applications. Um, so I kind of always had a hint of like doing stuff based on education. I'd been volunteering at this, elementary school since I was like 10. I had done a lot of like volunteer work with other schools in the district. I was constantly going in to help my dad at school. My junior project was based around uh, specifically elementary, but it could be middle school app development focused around that. And it kind of all just kind of clicked. I was like, I think I could probably go into being a teacher and kind of get that full-time payroll job. So I ended up choosing to go to RIT, partially because I had a family member who went through the same program, and she ended up getting a job right out of college. But also because they have an accelerated program that only lasts 1 year. Most teaching degrees are 2 years, or at least for art teaching degrees. And you would spend like your first year taking all of your classes and your second year student teaching, from what I've been told, which is great. But RIT offered half of that in 1 year, get it all over with, spend less tuition money. That was kind of the big thing. And it was split by the 2 semesters that you'd be spending there. The first semester was all classes, community service, practicums, which were like practice lessons we would do with preschool kids. Winter break, we would get all of our workshops and professional development done. And then the second semester, which is where I'm at right now, that's where we would actually start student teaching. We'd take classes after student teaching. We'd focus on resume building, making a brochure, portfolio, website, and taking all of our exams that we need in order to become certified in New York State. That was another thing about RIT that I specifically liked, that they went over like making a specific resume just for teaching art, or making a portfolio only for teaching. Because as awesome as like the portfolios I made at Ithaca were, those were more broad and for like, going into like I said, fabrication or website design, or, like very generalized portfolios. Whereas when it comes to teaching portfolios, they're looking for very specific things. It's basically like a checklist of, you need to have a certain number of pictures with a certain number of students. It's very like precise, and RIT was willing to take us through that. So another thing I liked about going into education is I could still do a lot of the stuff that I really enjoyed. So part of my reasoning for becoming a teacher was I would kind of get to control the curriculum, at least in certain grade levels. There's a list of standards in New York State you have to follow, but they're pretty open-ended. As long as you can kind of shoehorn them into your lessons, you can pretty much teach whatever you want. So based on my minor, you can kind of tell that I have like a soft spot for animation. My senior capstone was about animation. So I was able to actually pull some of that enjoyment and put it into my first placement. I work at a middle school where I taught 6th graders, 8th graders how to do stop motion animation. 8th graders, we did some needle felting. I was super surprised to learn that the teacher had a full needle felting kit, and I definitely took advantage of that. And then the 6th graders is where we did more of like an animation project, where we focused on like storyboarding, building up our character designs, making very simple characters so we could focus on animating. These projects actually ended up being shown in the school art show that they do, the district-wide art show. I have a quick clip, it doesn't have any sound, of some of the animations that 6th graders did that I was pretty impressed with. It was pretty hastily put together. I had an original video that had the student's full name and the school, and I can't really share that. So there's just like a ominous black box that says student name up there. Just ignore that. But yeah, these are some of the animations that they were able to do, which they were only given, about a week. They only had a little bit of time to make a quick character, a quick story, and they were given a single block of Sculpey to make their character. And then they had one 40-minute block to animate all of this. So we really spent time focusing on the pre-production part, learning what goes into it before we actually animate, so that by the time we got to animating, they would be able to do this in one day. And a lot of them were able to make some pretty awesome stuff in 40 minutes. And I was pretty open with what students could and couldn't do. I had like a baseline of like what I was kind of expecting. I told them that it would be preferable if they had a background. We used pieces of folded up paper just to make a simple color background. Some students, like you saw slightly beforehand, the one with the blue blob, they ended up not using a background, but their animation was so good that I ended up, keeping it anyways in the final showing. And kids kind of took it wherever they wanted. A lot of them were inspired by like Gumby or like kind of characters that are more like amorphous blobs. Some of them wanted to do animals. They really kind of took it wherever they wanted, and it was a pretty successful project. The students really all enjoyed it. We just used iPads to do these, so their school district had a cart of iPads that were available to students. Our classrooms had to sign them out, and then we downloaded a free app called Stop Motion Studio. I ran it through their IT department first because they have to make sure everything's safe before they can actually put it on student iPads. So ran it through them, got it approved, had it downloaded on all the iPads. And I had a lot of students afterwards asking me like, oh, is this app free? Can I get this app on my phone? Can I make animations at home? Like I specifically picked a product that I knew anyone could get. Like I downloaded it on my own phone to practice a little bit before I started working with the students. So yeah, we used a lot of like accessible, well, I would say accessible technology. This program is also available on Chrome. So if students have like Chromebooks or Windows PCs, it can also be used on those or Android devices. So I tried to focus on like if theoretically I were to take this lesson to a place that doesn't have doesn't have iPads or doesn't have like, really expensive technology. Something students could just do on their cell phones if they had cell phones, or something that like the school could cobble together if they had a computer lab that had cameras, something like that. So yeah, I believe this is almost up. There's a little bit left. I might as well just let it play. It's pretty, I'm personally impressed with it. This was my first time teaching a group of kids this young to animate before. I had worked with some older students on animation, but never with sixth graders. And this was my first time trying to a group of like 10 or 11-year-olds could really focus on.
That's awesome. I love it. Yeah, great results for sixth graders, especially.
Were you they using
and
onions?
This was a lot. Yep. Yeah.
That's great.
Yep. So I did like a little mini lesson on onion skinning. I actually did a history presentation on the history of stop motion as a medium. They had a week-long break that was kind of awkwardly placed. So before the break, I did like a little history lesson. And then after the fact, we actually got into like, this is the app we're using. This is what onion skinning is. This is how you change the transparency, like a whole presentation on like how to use the actual app itself. We had access to a smartboard, so I was able to like show them in an app how to do things, which was very helpful. But this was a lot of the students' first times animating. I want to say pretty much everyone except for maybe one student in this video, this was their first time doing stop motion. So I was pretty impressed with what they were able to do for their first time. And then going on to my current placement, right now I'm actually working with elementary schoolers, so slightly younger kids. And I was able to some inspiration from the stuff that I enjoy doing, maybe not animation based. The school actually is at the school has less funding and they weren't able to procure the technology to do animation. So I was actually going to pull that sixth grade stop motion project and do it again in this place with this group of sixth graders. But because of the limitations, I wasn't able to do that. So I ended up going in a different direction and kind of pulling into more like 3D design or like more of the kind of fabrication stuff that I enjoy. They had already done a lot of painting and 2D work, so I was trying to diversify what they had already done a little bit. So we have a mobile at the top left that my kindergartners are currently working on. I have a rainbow that my first and second graders are working on. My third graders are making sun catchers inspired by butterflies. My fifth graders are making Picasso-inspired self-portraits in paper collage. And then my sixth graders are doing a clay project where they're making planters that look like faces so that the plant is the hair. And all of these are inspired by artists that are either current working artists or pre-existing, maybe not so contemporary artists like Picasso back in, the olden days. But like the face planters I pulled from like Mexican folk art. That was a predominant theme in some of their pottery, was using faces. And there's a current art movement called Cara de Planta. It's an art group, I guess, located in Mexico that makes specific types of planters that have human faces on them. So a lot of teaching right now is pulling from diverse subject matter and pulling it into a lesson and kind of connecting that so that they have a connection to the outside world, which is something that I kind of enjoy. I like learning and I like kind of finding out new stuff for myself. Like I had no idea about Cara de Planta. The butterflies were inspired by a installation work in the Mall of America. There are giant monarch butterflies hanging up in one of the atriums there. So that was inspired by that. So I got to learn about that. The birds were inspired by an artist who used recycled materials to make birds. And we were kind of focusing on like an Earth Day unit. So a lot of the stuff in this is either recycled paper, recycled pieces of cardboard, or clay that was kind of repurposed. So I was able to kind of like learn a lot about certain aspects of art that I didn't necessarily know about, just to make projects that I was already into. Like I already like building stuff with clay. I already like paper collage. I already like 3D modeling or making stuff with cardboard. So I was able to kind of learn stuff while doing stuff I already was pretty comfortable with and teaching it to younger students. So yeah, that was kind of a long-winded journey of how I went from undergrad to fabrication to figuring out I kind of wanted a little bit more stability and going straight into education. And the education, it's been a bit of a journey, but I've really learned a lot about like what it takes to be a teacher and kind of how to do it in a way that's still like fun for me. I mean, obviously the students are your priority, but it also can be a job that's really rewarding for you yourself as a teacher. And during my student teaching, I've kind of learned that, I guess. That's really the end of my presentation. I know it was kind of garbled and all over the place, and I apologize for that.
No, you're good. The audio held out great the whole time. I'm just wondering if you can try to put a video back if possible. I don't know if it's gonna work. Maybe not.
It might not. Zoom is notorious on my computer specifically for not liking my video.
Okay. All good. Was that just a question on that last slide in the lower left? Was that you?
Oh, yeah, that was like a lot of the projects we only have a couple class periods, and each class period is like 40 or 30 or 40 minutes. So they have to be made pretty quickly. So I time myself whenever I make these, and I made that in like, I think an hour. So it'd be 2 class periods for them. Just like a very quick hodgepodge together self-portrait.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. Great style. Very cool. Yeah, just wanted to, and I thought that was a great, coming from also a family of educators too. It is a very rewarding thing. Something that, that connection and seeing a student grow is just, I don't know, wonderful. It's cool when you can also bring your art into it too. That's makes it doubly good. All right, so just want to open up to questions or conversation in general. Yeah. Hey, Jason.
I'm gearing up to talk to my ACP folks about job hunt and freelance and paid gigs and gigs that feed your soul versus gigs that suck your soul. And Annelise, it sounds like you've been on the full journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard because it's like you know, s- students are trying to figure out a lot of stuff when they're in college, but
Mhm.
getting this in your head as to what it's going to be like once you're out of college is it's hard to convey just how much of a job it is finding jobs.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
you certainly did, I thought you conveyed that pretty well.
Yeah, I would I mean, it definitely wasn't for me, constantly being on that hunt, but I would say that the jobs that require that hunt, the jobs that are maybe more freelance, those are totally worth getting. Like, I loved every moment of working at Monkey Boys, and if I'd gotten the other jobs that I had applied for, I'm sure I would have loved those too. So like, even though it was really hard, constantly being on the work, constantly being on the lookout, constantly looking all over the internet for different places that would be hiring, and constantly updating everything and turning in my resume, it was totally worth it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, you got to that industry. Talk about niche. Like I imagine, like as you said, like everybody knows the Jim Henson Network directly. It's probably a lot of older folks too have had like veterans. It seems like that would be a pretty tight industry to find work in.
Oh yeah, definitely. I wouldn't call it a cult, but it did feel a little culty at times when I went there. I'm not gonna lie.
Hmm.
Everyone knew each other. Everyone had some form of connection. It was all very tight knit.
Yep. And something to every industry, as long as there's some sort of niche, and everybody knows everybody in some way. So good lesson to play well wherever you're at, right? Ryan,
Yeah, definitely.
stand up. Sorry.
Hi, Annelise. Hello. Thank you so much for
Hi.
coming out today. Um, I wanted to ask more about your pipeline with your capstone, where you printed out multitude of faces for your stop motion. Can you talk like a little bit more
Mhm.
about like the process of like having all those faces and 3D printing them? How did you ever get like majorly confused between the different like faces? Did you have numbers on like the back of them? I just want to learn more about like 3D printing alongside like 3D modeling. Just like your experience with
Yeah,
that.
yeah, totally. So I had a little bit of experience ahead of time. I had used like filament printers and like those really like uh, a little more accessible like bamboo printers. Um, Before I dove into the resin printers that I ended up using for this project, a lot of it was storyboarding ahead of time exactly what I wanted to happen in my animation and kind of creating like a little animatic. So I knew exactly what facial expressions I wanted my character to make ahead of time. So that way I could kind of animate my character in Maya beat for beat as I was going and figure out what expressions I knew they needed. Actually going into printing them was a little bit of an issue. The printer that I was using ended up breaking halfway through, so I only got like 15 faces out of the like 40 or 60 that I modeled. My final animation, I ended up cutting a lot of it out, shortening the story and kind of cutting out some of my character's facial movements uh, and hiding it with like tricks of the camera and stuff because that printer kind of really basically, I wouldn't say exploded, but it did get resin everywhere, and it was a hassle for the teacher who owned it. And I didn't want to like, they have their own stuff too. I wasn't gonna beg them to print like 100 faces for my random capstone, so I worked around it. Um, yes, it was Ed. Yeah, he was super awesome about letting me use that, but I wasn't gonna force him to, make that many faces. So I didn't necessarily get to do that. Um, but yeah, like it if I had, I would have had a ton of faces, and I only knew what those faces were because I had storyboarded everything ahead of time and made an animatic. It's a lot of pre-planning before you get into actually making the individual faces.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stop motion, right, is essentially pre-animated, blocked beforehand before it's actually practically animated. Like you said, basically with facial stuff in Maya, you essentially set up a blend shape system, so a facial rig. We're essentially animating that through your sequence of facial expressions. So 3D animation before getting to the point where you can actually stop motion animate it. You know, tech certainly can give you more options, but sometimes can make things more complicated, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Do you still have your armature and stuff, or I don't know what agreement was with?
Yeah, I do have the original armature. I kind of had to explain, like, I could give the armature back, but that would involve completely ripping apart the puppet that I made. So they were pretty cool about letting me keep it.
Good. Yeah, because you had
Yeah.
to source like a custom made, like it was not easy to get that thing, right?
No, that was from a company that specifically made armatures for amateur animators. And it came in a kit where it was just a bunch of different pieces, and you had to physically saw apart different pieces to get like the length of arm and stuff like that. It was a lot. I had to use the jewelry lab over in the art building to saw a bunch of metal to get it to work. But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So if you get a call to go back to Monkey Boy, what will you do?
Oh, I would totally accept it. I mean, well, okay. If it was during a time that I could, I guess. I kind of explained to the HR woman there. I was like, "Hey, this is kind of out of the blue, but I'm going into teaching. But if you have any jobs open in the summer, I would totally be open to, doing some freelance work, for another month long or a couple of month long job. If they ever offered me another job like that, I would totally accept it. The environment there was amazing. I really liked working there."
And you do have a nice kind of extended periods off as a teacher, so you can certainly do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice to stay fresh. Questions, comments? No. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. I'll be sticking around a little bit after if you want to hang out and talk. Thank you again, Annelise. It's been great hearing about your journey since graduating.
Yeah, of course. I want to apologize for how kind of messy that was. If you do go into teaching, just know that your schedule will be packed. I've been teaching K through 6 since 7 a.m. and then I had a 3-hour class immediately after, and then I came here. So I understand.
Yeah,
just finding a time to meet up was really tough too.
Well, that age group is exhausting. Yeah. But I didn't feel like your presentation was well, I thought it was right on. So nice job, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. It was
yeah, of course.
really
Thank
nice
you for
to hear
inviting me.
what you're doing. Yeah.